On this episode of Inside Engineering, we welcome guests Karen Hutchins-Keim and Matt Bray from our Cultural Resources Group as they talk about archaeology, architecture, and digging holes. Inside Engineering, untold stories and fascinating people from the world of civil engineering. This is episode 9, recorded in September 2019. Archaeology, Architecture, and Cultural Resources with Karen Hutchins-Keim and Matt Bray. Inside Engineering is brought to you by RK&K. Learn more at rkk.com. Welcome back to another episode of Inside Engineering. We have an exciting show planned for you today, and we've got, right to my left, we've got Karen Hutchins-Keim. She's a archaeological lab manager here in our Baltimore office. And so thanks for joining us on the show, Karen.
Thanks for having me.
And to her left, we've got Matt Bray. Matt has trekked on up here from Richmond, our Richmond office, and he's a project architectural historian. And so thank you both for joining us today.
Thanks for having us.
It's awesome. We're glad that you could be here. You both are in our Cultural Resources Group, which isn't a super descriptive name. So what can you each go through what you do? I mean, Karen, I know you do a lot more. Archaeological lab manager is not also a super descriptive title. Can you go through first what you do and then Matt, take a stab at it?
Sure. Well, the Cultural Resources Group is in our planning section here at RK&K. And as I am trained as an archaeologist, and so, I am our archaeological lab manager. But I also run archaeological projects. And you might be asking, we do archaeology at RK&K?
Well, I was going to ask that, so thank you.
So we do archaeology at RK&K. Our primary clients are transportation clients, so state, county, and I guess not really local transportation departments. I don't think they really exist. But we do have some local clients. But transportation clients, and basically federal law and some state laws require that in advance of transportation projects, the departments of transportation demonstrate the effects on archaeological resources. And Matt can talk a little bit more about the architectural resources. And so basically, before a lot of construction projects, those big highway projects, they have gone out and done archaeology to determine whether or not there are like very significant Native American remains in the project right of way, or historic colonial sites or cemeteries and things like that. So I'm both usually the technical leader of those projects, and I'm also our archaeological lab manager. And so once the materials come back in from the field, I run the processing, washing, identification, sorting, and storing of those artifacts. And we do have a lab in our Baltimore office, and that's where we do that stuff.
Nice.
That's a brief summary.
Absolutely. I've got a couple questions to come back to. I want to get Matt in here to talk about what he does and how maybe what the cross section is of what Karen does, or your specific focus.
Yeah. So like Karen was saying, I'm an architectural historian, also in the planning group, primarily transportation projects. We work on pretty similar projects, and my focus is architectural history. So where Karen's working on archaeology, I'm primarily working on historic buildings. It could be historic buildings. It could be historic bridges, historic roads. We really encompass anything that could be considered historic. And by historic, we generally cut off the rule at 50 years.
Okay.
So sometimes something that you think maybe wouldn't be historic is actually historic for federal guidelines. We work on transportation projects. I think that's a good summary.
All right. So let's say there's a project that a client wants, and you need to go out and evaluate what's historic. Do you take a look at where the project is happening and then go survey what's in that space, or do you have a database of that you can pull up of the age of things in that area? How do you go about identifying what is historic and what isn't?
A little bit of both. Generally, if you have a transportation corridor, a project, there are state databases of what's been previously recorded. They're kept with the State Historic Preservation Officer. and those are available GIS products. So that kind of gives you an idea of what's out there that's been previously identified. We also, will do background research, historic maps, anything to try to figure out. We use property appraiser data, things like that, to try to get an idea of what might be historic, kind of before we go out in the field. And then at the end of the day, a lot of it is just driving around, seeing what might be historic, looking for historic houses. More and more, I would say we rely on like GIS data and parcel data, that sort of stuff before we go out in the field. But it's hard to beat driving around and taking photos of buildings. Yeah.
All right. So Karen, Matt's stuff, a lot of it is above ground. You mentioned archaeology, which tends to be below ground. How do you identify where you need to check? Are you just doing a random sample? How do you know that you've taken into account all the possible archaeological sites that might be there?
Sure. Well, we would also start with a GIS analysis. Archaeological sites, previously identified archaeological sites, are held in a database with each of the state historic preservation offices. So we'll look at that, and we'll look at where the locations of where previous surveys have been conducted. So we know where not to look. If someone's already looked there and hasn't found anything, we don't need to go back. And then we basically look at topographic maps and soil maps to determine areas within a project corridor that would have a high likelihood of having archaeological remains. Prehistoric remains tend to be near water. They tend to be on relatively level ground, so they're not going to be on a 25 or 50% slope or on the side of a cliff outside of possibly like rock shelters. And then, so we identify those areas that would be sensitive. Historic areas we'd look at historic maps and for old roads and or buildings that have been depicted on the maps. And then we go out and we dig lots of holes. So we dig a lot of holes.
Looking for something.
Yes. So what we often provide clients is what we call an archeological assessment, which is like, here are the areas that we believe to be of high sensitivity. And in the future, you probably want to do archaeological survey there, but it is often a cost-saving measure that we use with clients, sort of let them know like how much they're going to be in for, how much testing they're going to need to do, and then they make arrangements using that information. So sometimes we don't have to dig, but often we have to dig.
So what comes next in the process? If sort of to both of you, you've gone out to a site, you've identified some areas that might have archaeological remains, you might have some historic buildings. What does the client do with that information? I mean, what if those things are directly where they want to put a road or make improvements to something? How do you know how they handle that next?
You want to go first, Matt?
Yeah. I would say, that's kind of where the second part of our jobs comes into play, especially here at Arch&K, is that, we do work closely with engineers in planning. So, my first instinct would be, well, we can hopefully design around it. So we do work with the engineers to hopefully design around some of that stuff. But what we would want to do is evaluate an archaeological site or a historic building for listing in the National Register. And that's where you get into some of the federal regulations of what's a significant historic building versus just another historic building. Just an old building, right. Exactly. So that's kind of where I would say our expertise comes into play, is identifying what is significant and then how the project itself will affect that, or if the project itself will affect those types of resources. And then we get into, well, how can we work around it? Is there no way to work around it? What can be done from there?
Is this one of the reasons, and not to get a whole bunch of drivers angry at you, but is this one of the reasons why we get roads sometime that seem to be going straight and then they just seem to meander around only to come back to going straight again? Because there's been some kind of finding that needs to be designed around.
I suppose it's definitely possible that it's an archaeological site or a historic building that is the cause of that problem. I think there are also a lot of other
There are
causes.
wetlands and so I wasn't trying to lay it all on your
say that, yeah, it's not just us. There's other things at play.
In fairness, but it could be that and other things, environmental wetlands, things like that need to be protected.
But particularly with archaeological sites, and Matt could tell you how much this is done with architectural sites. But with archaeological sites, there's also the option of what we call a phase 3 excavation, which is basically the mitigation of the archaeological site. But it's not so much mitigating the site as sort of total recovery of all information so that you can get maximal benefit for having then to destroy and go through the archaeological site.
Okay. You basically get everything out of there that's historical.
It's like a pretty big, it's the kind of archaeological investigation that people think about when they think about archaeology, like, hundreds of square feet, or thousands of square feet all open up, and tons
pattern,
of, like dozens of archaeologists with trowels and that's the kind of archaeological excavation that people think about often.
How often does that happen?
Not as often as you would think. Archaeological sites actually tend to be pretty small, and often you can, mitigate them, or you can not mitigate them. You can design around them. Mm-hmm. And a lot of archaeological sites we find do not meet the standards for eligibility or listing on the National Register of Historic Places.
Okay, so just because you've got an archaeological site doesn't mean you have to design around it.
Exactly.
Okay.
I mean, a couple lithic flakes, stone flakes, from stone tools or some historic ceramics, is not necessarily, significant in the definition, the federal definition of the word. And so a lot of archaeological sites we record, goes into the database, we catalog all the artifacts, we write the report, we generate the information we can, but then the project is allowed to continue as originally scheduled.
Okay.
Or as designed.
So, all right, so if you're out on a site, Karen and Matt, I'm going to ask you kind of the same question about buildings, but two-part question. One, what's the craziest thing you've ever found? And two, what is something that you always hope you'll find or that you get especially excited about finding?
Well, that is a question archaeologists always get asked.
Oh,
what's the craziest thing?
I fell into the stereotype.
Well, and it's one of these questions I actually have a really hard time answering because I think people want me to say like a pot of gold or, the most exciting thing. I don't know if it's exciting is the right word, but before I came to RK&K many jobs ago, I worked for Thomas Jefferson. I worked for the Thomas Jefferson Foundation at Monticello very early in my career. And we had found, many years before I started working there, they had found half of a porcelain plate in a trash pit that was associated with the Jefferson family and probably, given the time period, probably with Thomas Jefferson. And then we found a similar plate about half a mile away associated with enslaved men and women who had worked on his plantation. And initially we just thought it was the same pattern. And then we started looking at it, and all of a sudden we realized they mended together and they were the same plate.
Oh, wow.
And, it's a plate, it's trash, but our theory is that someone found the plate, the broken plate, in the trash and took half of it back with them to their house half a mile away, because how else is it going to get there?
Right.
And for me, it was just this very interesting moment of like a human being doing a human thing, which is taking something that they found pretty or interesting back with them. And for me, that's like what archaeology is all about. Is like you're touching people's stuff, and some of it's their trash, but some of it's the stuff that was valuable to them. And we just assumed it was a piece of a plate, like it was just trash. But turns out, I think its movement across the plantation indicates it might have been more significant. So that's the story I like to use about my favorite artifact.
Yeah.
Half of a plate.
Half of a plate.
Half of a plate. Yeah.
Nice. Matt, how about you? You go out. What's I don't know if there's I'm going to sound very inconsiderate here when I say I don't know if there's anything crazy about old buildings that you would find, because they're much more visible. But what is kind of the most exciting thing that you've ever found, or what do you geek out about finding?
Yeah, kind of along the same lines. We so often we have projects where there's a lot of significant buildings. And, it might be something like a train station or something like that that's very obviously significant. Those are neat, or, a 19th century row of Victorian houses, something like that. Like, that's always neat for an architectural historian to see. But I usually enjoy some of the smaller houses or something the unexpected. You know, when you're researching a house and you come across a reference to someone locally important or something along those lines, sort of the unexpected. You know, it's easy to pick out the architecturally significant houses or buildings or anything like that, but I find the resources that have interesting backstories are usually more interesting to me. Yeah.
Oh, that's good. I like, not knowing what you're gonna get when you go out to do it, I imagine, is a pretty exciting part.
Yeah, I think that's always
new.
Something surprising.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned earlier that a lot of this stuff is done or so that clients can be in compliance with federal law. So that's obviously a big value that we're bringing to the client is by helping them accomplish that. How do you measure the success, though, of what you're doing, both from a project standpoint and from the people doing that work? There's a lot of staff that has to do these things. How do you sort of mentor and see what's going on with those people?
Well, I mean, I think I sort of measure, my personal success in like two ways. One is, I think that the preservation of archaeological resources is very important. And it's one of the reasons I got into archaeology. And so when we can preserve or protect an archaeological resource, either through, usually that would be through, identifying it and then providing the client with that information, and then they can redesign to avoid it. That particularly we've worked on a number of projects that have cemeteries on them. And so, when we can avoid those, I think that's really successful. The other thing is, I think when we can solve a problem for a client, we had a client recently who, late in the stages of a project, identified that there was a small family cemetery very near within the LOD of their project. And we were able to mobilize very quickly to survey and delineate the cemetery and give them the information they need to start working with their engineers and figure out what is physically possible to hopefully avoid the cemetery, because they have their own reasons for wanting to avoid it, as opposed to having to move people, which is an option that is often employed. And so, we were able to do that really quickly. And I think it's really nice when that, when they have a problem and they come to you and you can, solve it quickly for them. Mm-hmm. Or at least help them, give them the information to solve their own problem.
Yeah. No, so you're seeing a sort of a direct result of that benefit of what you're doing. Any thoughts on, people and how we're bringing them along? I think a lot of our viewers are early on in their career. Do you all have any? Matt, do you have anything you wish you'd known earlier on in your career? Or a great bit of wisdom you were perhaps given? A great bit of,
I guess, a little bit of both. Something I wish I'd known and that I could pass along would be that I have continued to work in this field. So many people coming into it, archaeologists and historic preservation, architectural historians, so many people burn out pretty quickly. It can be a tough line of work, but I would say to stick with it. There's kind of always something new, a new way to reinvent your career. Whether, for us, we work in transportation. We're historians in transportation, but there's other fields. There's a lot of ways to continue working in cultural resources, I would say. Don't give up.
Don't give up. You mentioned some of the challenges right there, and maybe even potentially burning out. What are there signs of that? I mean, besides the fact that you're exhausted and you feel like it's all ending, but what sort of for you was a sign that was happening, and that and how would you tell somebody to sort of stick with it?
Well, for a lot of people coming out, you have to go through a lot of education to get to where we're at, to what we do, and it may not feel like you're valued as highly as you should be, but stick with it and it'll come.
Things get better.
Yeah.
That's
Hopefully that's not too disheartening to anyone.
No. I think
but-
it's very realistic. I mean, I think a lot of the advice that we've had from our guests has been like look at the big picture kind of thing. Like you don't get too focused on where you are right now because there's a long way to go. And so I think that's really good. I think it's appropriate.
Well, one of the things that I would, in archaeology, we use a lot of what we call archaeological field technicians, and they tend to be people with bachelor's degrees, new in the field, but they don't have advanced degrees. And so we primarily use them to dig holes. And so they do a lot of hard labor. But I get an opportunity to meet a lot of them. And the advice I always give is specialize. Archaeology, I did not take this as my own advice, but I wish I had. Specialize. You can become a specialist in GIS. You can become a specialist in soils. You can become a specialist in human or animal bones, and do those things because you are an archaeologist, but then you have this additional set of skills. And often we have to go and hire specialists when we need specialist analysis. And we have a set few people we like to use, but often they're busy and can't get to our project for a month or two. And so I think there's probably business out there, but also it just gives you, not only are you an archaeologist and can do all the archaeology things, but then you can do this specialized skill. And then just knowing GIS should be a must for just about everyone, I think, in archaeology and probably even in architectural history at this point.
Yeah.
Stay up to speed with the technology.
Yeah. And, a lot of people go into archaeology and they want to be professors and they want to go to Peru or, Iraq or China and dig up, very ancient remains, which I completely understand. Most of the jobs in archaeology in this country are in CRM. And so I would also get experience shovel bumming, digging those test pits everywhere, because you never know who will hire you to do more the next time. So, yeah.
I think we just learned a cool inside term.
Oh, shovel bumming.
shovel
Yeah.
bumming.
Yeah. There's a whole, basically, you can basically go from project to project around the country. So if you enjoy a nomadic lifestyle, and some people do, and you like to be outdoors, and, you like working hard, it's a great way to make a meager living, I think, would be a fair assessment early on. But
you just travel around and help out.
yeah,
with,
and some people do it
with
professionally. Some people really like it. If you have a wandering heart or spirit. I don't. I'm a homebody, and so it does not work for me. But I think some people really enjoy it.
I in a former life, I shovel bummed for about 7 or 8 years when I finished my bachelor's degree as an archaeologist before I went back to grad school and became an architectural historian. So I can speak to it a little bit. It's a rough life.
I wish I'd have started the episode with that. Oh, man.
And what it comes down to is that a lot of what we do is hard work. Even field work for architectural historians. I mean, we're out there in the sun and the heat taking photos. I mean, it's long days.
Well, we literally cleared brush for 2 days.
We did.
This was
at a cemetery recently.
At a cemetery recently.
Chainsaw skills are important.
Yes, we did.
Just so that you could get to
this
the
was
part
the
of
most
things.
educated brush clearing crew you have ever seen.
Most overqualified.
Yeah, we had some
brush clearing.
planners from the Newport News office.
Wow.
And another archaeologist from our Fairfax office. Yeah.
But yeah, any of this, not to say that chainsaw is a soft skill, but any of the soft skills that can make you more marketable are always good. Like Karen was saying, GIS, some of those things. I mean, a lot of what we do, if you can't operate Microsoft Word, then you could be the best archaeologist out there. But if you're not gonna be successful if you can't open up a Word document, operate a printer. Some of those things that you don't think about when you're kind of getting into the field. When you're younger,
it's getting a lot more
important.
technological.
Yeah. You have to be able to. You pretty much need GIS for archaeology, and more as an architectural historian, we rely on GIS. So yeah.
All right, so you all are the experts in your field. What, compared to me, for sure.
That's probably safe.
Yeah, that's basically safe. What else? Is there anything else we should talk about? We've got a couple more minutes. What is there anything pressing? Anything that I've missed that our listeners would be keen to hear before we get to our picks of the week? Those are
I always like to remind people that archaeologists do not dig up dinosaurs. but I think we've covered that already.
Yeah,
but
we
that
did.
is what I always like to lead. Should have led with that, honestly, in case someone was confused. But.
Well, we can make that the show title. We
Yes.
don't dig up dinosaurs.
Yes, sure.
Okay. All right.
That's good.
That's good. Anything, Matt? You got anything while our lights are blinking? I gotta fix these lights. I'm gonna do something about it eventually. They blink about 25 minutes in every time. I don't know.
They're just kicking us out.
Yeah, that's
a warning.
Maybe that's the signal. That's a good.
Time's up.
Point. It's built in. Anything you want to last words, Matt? Before,
No, I would say, that what we do in cultural resources, I believe is an important part of sort of the larger scheme of things. We work closely with natural resources. We work closely with the planners. We work closely with engineers. And I think working together as a team, is beneficial to everyone, If you can involve us early in the process, we can usually help out and make everything go smoother.
I actually did think of one other thing.
yeah, sure.
Can I add it?
Absolutely.
Sort of in line with that, I think often I think engineers, either don't know where we work here or do this work, or really don't think of it as very important in the scheme of like building a massive highway project. And the one thing I would say is like often the public really does. And so they have a historic district that's very important to them, or they know that there's an archaeological site here. And particularly if you have communities that have been in a place for a very long time. And so it is often a great place to, for clients to extend a lot of goodwill to the public, but also a place where sometimes things can go very wrong if the resources aren't taken seriously early on. So I think, get us in early because, we can often identify potential problem spots that might not even be a problem from federal law, but from perception, public perception.
Right.
And it's good to get out in front of that sometimes.
Right. Well, and that's a real benefit to the client right there is keeping that goodwill with the public. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, very much so. All right. So it's time now for our picks of the week. Karen and Matt both have something for us that they're going to recommend. I don't know what they are, which makes me more excited for them. So, Karen, you want to take yours?
Sure. I'm in the process of finishing up a short podcast. It's called Bear Brook by New Hampshire Public Radio. And it is the story of a series of human remains that were found in barrels in a state park north of Manchester, New Hampshire, and about sort of the search for figuring out who the victims were and who killed them. And they use a lot of the major technique they start using to try to identify people and figure out what happened is genetic genealogy. So, when you put your, DNA on Ancestry.com or 23andMe, and then they can sort of connect it through and see who's related to who and sort of try to find the crimes. And this is actually the case that sort of began the use of that. And so subsequently, I think in the news, you've probably heard about them identifying serial killers and things like that. And
found
this
one guy
case
through his cousin or something.
Exactly. Yeah. And so I have not put my DNA on the internet because that makes me uncomfortable. But all it requires is like one cousin to have done it one time. And so, but anyway, it's very interesting. Bear Brook. And there's only like 7 or 8 episodes. They're 30 minutes long. So it's not like a huge lift to get through it, and it's
available now.
Yep.
All right, I'm gonna go subscribe to it right after the show.
It's very
Brook. We'll put the info in the show notes. Yeah,
it's very cool.
Awesome,
cool,
nice. All right, Matt.
I'm gonna go with the Richmond Folk Festival. Nice. Folk music from all over the world coming up in 2 weeks. Fall festival season. Fall beers.
Okay.
That's my pick.
Everything fall related. Okay.
It's fall. It's good. It is officially fall, so yes.
Just
does not feel like it.
Yep.
All right, Richmond Fall Festival, Bear Brook podcast. I can't even say the word. Well, thank you both for coming up. I appreciate you taking the time to come in and talk with us about what you do. I love talking about these quote unquote niche services, but you guys do some cool stuff, and thank you for sharing.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
You can check out Inside Engineering every Tuesday, where we will be talking with lots of different experts in their field. Thanks for joining us. You can also check out our website at rkk.com/podcast, where you can stream every episode on demand, as well as leave some feedback for us. We've got a short anonymous survey that we'd love for you to tell us how we're doing, and so we can make the show even better for you. We're available on all your favorite podcasting channels. We're trying to be in as many places as possible. So thank you for joining us. Thank you, Karen. Thank you, Matt. And we'll see you all next week on another episode of Inside Engineering.